Yes, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. I'm Jacob Turner. He's THI publisher Andrew Jones, and we are here for another edition of our UNC Basketball Look-Ahead Series, and we're going to be focusing on Paxson Wojcik in this episode. Transfer guard for the Tar Heels. Going to be his first season at North Carolina, but his fifth as a college basketball player. So a ton of things to talk about in this one. Before we dive into it, big thank you to myprivatefranchise.net for sponsoring this show. As we always do, we will talk about them a little bit more later on in this one, so stay tuned for that. But AJ, Paxson Wojcik's, I'm trying to think of the right word. Journey might be the right word, from
Journey's good.
Loyola of Chicago to Brown to North Carolina, where he is now for a final season as a college basketball player. For those who don't know, 2 years at Loyola Chicago to start out, and then last 2 seasons were spent at Brown, having his most prolific season last year where he averaged 14.9 points, started in all 27 games, and averaged 34.6 minutes per, 7.2 rebounds and 3.2 assists as well. So a guy who did a little bit of everything last year for Brown. Now, let me take you back, AJ, real quick before we look ahead, because I remember this time. I remember where I was when Wojcik committed, because as we always do, we'll do a podcast and everything like that when things like that break. And I remember was it the day before, or the day after Caleb Love announced he was transferring? Was it the same day? I don't remember. It was within a couple of days is when Love transferred and Wojcik came in. I think you remember that.
And the universe thought that he was Hubert's way of replacing. He
was the replacement and coming off the replacement.
And we had to come on and do a podcast to pull everybody away from the cliff.
Yeah, yank him from the cliff that they were getting ready to jump off.
Because last basketball season, Carolina fans spent a lot of time looking over the cliff, pondering.
Thinking about jumping, putting one toe over.
They were just over there. And you and I are just like, come on, come back this way.
Reel it back in, guys. It's not. And I remember that vividly, because there was an overreaction, as there always is on social media. I remember people tweeting me or just Tar Heel Illustrated and just saying, Caleb Love leaves and we replace him with Paxson Wojcik. And again, that's just not what the case was. And I think people understand now that was never the case with who Carolina's brought in. But I just remember that vividly, especially coming off the year that Carolina had. It was just a very weird time for Carolina basketball. And based on the transfer portal class that they did have in the offseason, they had, I think, the vibe around the program and the excitement around the program, which Elliot Cadeau kind of being the icing on top of the cake, or the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake, the vibes completely shifted from the day that Wojcik committed to North Carolina. So when you look at, he's a journeyman, AJ, he's played a lot of basketball. He's a guy that probably never dreamed of playing at North Carolina when he first committed to Loyola Chicago back in, when he first got there back in 2019. So it's an interesting one, but again, I think it's cool that he's here and going to be a Tar Heel. So when you think of Paxson Wojcik and his journey here, what are your thoughts on it? Because again, if you asked him 4 years ago, I don't think he'd say, I wouldn't be surprised when I'm playing at North Carolina in a few years. I think he'd probably be like, you're crazy.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I think he did dream of it, but a long time ago. And his basketball journey started when he was born. And his dad was an assistant coach at North Carolina when he was born.
There's a picture of him wearing Carolina gear under the basket at the Smith Center. I forgot what it is, but yeah.
They had a place in Charleston, so he was born in Charleston. But his dad was an assistant coach at North Carolina when he was born. And so he's had little Carolina in him all along. The UNC recently ran a bunch of photos on Twitter. They had their own photo day, where they took the bunch of stuff. The players did all the images that you see during games on the video board,
the video jumbotrons,
all the stuff and he's in his jersey, he's in the uniform. And I kind of looked at it and thought, that's a guy. You and I both played a lot of sports growing up and in high school and stuff, and you kind of primp a little bit. In football, we used to love looking at the mirror. Got to make sure the neck rolls.
Oh man, look good. Stuff. Hey, look good, play good.
And you got to, when you tuck in the basketball jersey, you got to make sure there's a little bit of loose down the bottom of the tongue.
I was all about that with soccer, socks all the way up. I was in that.
So I can imagine Paxson Wojcik had a moment where he looked in the mirror and saw himself in that uniform, and nobody would fault him for having an emotional couple of seconds there to really feel different, because it was there. And I think that's cool. So I do think that he dreamt of it at one point, but he never thought it'd become a reality as his basketball game started to evolve. Now, Loyola, when he went there, was right after, I think, Loyola's Final Four trip. I think 18, they were in the Final Four, was it?
I believe so. Around that time, yes. It was before he got there.
Mm-hmm. It's a good program. And then he goes to Brown. A couple of things I like about his journey is that he's played two different kinds of college basketball. Loyola, which uber patient, sort of the modern day version of what Princeton under Pete Carril used to be back in the 80s and 90s. And you have to be cerebral to play there. You have to understand how to play off one another and cut. Cutting is a premium when you play in a program like that. So hoops guys, when I was younger, I used to call them camp kids. You'd watch a youth league basketball game or a middle school game and you see some kids playing, you know that they went to camp. Mm-hmm. Like they went to they're the kids that look like no one ever taught them how to shoot because their shot would be ugly. And then there's that 12-year-old who's got a nice follow through on his shot. That's a camp kid, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wojcik was a camp kid every day of his life because his dad was a basketball coach. His dad was David Robinson's point guard at Navy. Mm-hmm. Remember where I grew up? Navy was a big deal back in the 80s when Robinson was there, and Doug Wojcik was his point guard, and he was really good. I mean, he had one of the best entry lobs I've ever seen in college basketball. So Paxson is learning all the nuances of the game. Nuances become instincts over time. So he goes to Brown, and he has a chance to really just kind of let all that stuff flow a little bit more. And last year, he averaged in the last 15 games, he had 14 points in 15 plus games last year, mm-hmm. four assists in 13 games. And he's a guy that closed strong. He averaged 20 points a game down the stretch, more than 7.5 rebounds, almost 4 assists. He shot 40% from 3-point range. Here's a guy that would dip his hands into a lot of baskets. I will give you a couple more examples here. People sometimes don't like when we read too many numbers on these pods, but I'm going to do it now anyway. At Michigan State, he had 11 points or 10 points, but he also had 13 rebounds and 4 assists. And remember, his dad was an assistant at Michigan State. He scouted his son. And in our piece that we ran a couple of days ago, there's a quote in there from his dad giving a scouting report on Paxson, which is really cool because you don't get that very often.
Yeah, it's really cool.
He articulates all the intangibles that Paxson brings to the floor. Then they had a game at Northwestern last year. He had 13 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. So he had 4 assists at Michigan State, 4 assists at Northwestern, which is a significant step up from Brown. And he had combined 21 rebounds in those 2 games. So there's a toughness to him. So he's a guy that plays with others. He's a cutter. He's a see the floor guy. He's a toughness kind of guy. He's going to mix it up. He may not look like a guy. If you go to a playground, he may not get picked to be the dude that mixes it up, but he's going to mix it up. And then he's got all those hoops, nuance, intangibles and stuff. So I like this. I liked it when they got him. And by the way, he was a captain last year. They have 5 captains, 5 guys on the roster that were captains last year. 3 of them, they came in through the portal. So he brings a lot. Hubert said in his summer press conference when he was talking about the new guys, first thing he said about Paxson, he's a guy that will gather the dudes at the free throw line right before a free throw, right before, like during a dead ball, he'll gather guys. He'll do a little bit of fanny patting and that kind of thing because he's a coach on the floor, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But he also is a guy who's not afraid to speak up already. So there's gravitas, there's all those positive things that a guy like him brings to the table. And he'll be happy with the role that he has. People thought, man, that guy's going to start. I don't think he's going to start. He may only play 10, 12, 15 minutes a game. Maybe he plays 25. Who knows? But whatever role he has, he's going to help them in that role. He will be in the rotation, and he will help this team win games. And whatever he's asked to do, he'll do because he's proven in college he can do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's no doubt about it. And we'll look ahead to him in a second because I want to talk about what his role might be on this year's team, because it's an interesting situation for me, which we'll go into in a second. Before we do, AJ, want to give a thank you to MyPerfectFranchise.net for sponsoring this one. Andy Ludicky, been with us for a long time. He's the founder and owner of My Perfect Franchise, and he's a franchise veteran. I mean, we talk about it all the time. He's been doing it forever. And give it a little backstory on him real quick. He's a guy that was kind of in a position of, working in the corporate world, didn't really want to do it anymore and decided to look into opening his own franchise, doing his own thing. He's been very, very successful at it, owns multiple franchises and businesses right now. And he decided once he kind of got to a point where he was financially stable and feeling good and had more free time to kind of do what he wanted to. I remember talking to him, a conversation we had off camera one time. And he said, yeah, I wanted to give back. I wanted people that were in my position who weren't really happy with what they were doing. And I found a way to get out of it and become kind of financially independent. He did that. And now he's trying to give back and help people do the same kind of journey that he did. And I think that's so cool. And the coolest part about it to me, AJ, which I always harp on these, because I think this is the most important thing, because when people hear about stuff like this, they think, well, yeah, we're going to have to pay this guy to do this for me, and I'll be in the hole before I even get started. If you don't make a penny, he doesn't make a penny. And that to me is something you guys just have to understand. So that's the coolest part about it to me, is if you've thought about doing it, it's almost like having a guy who's walked the walk right there beside you every step of the way to help you get there. And I think that gives you a confidence, and that gives you kind of an assuredness that you don't often have when you're trying to start a new career, open your own business, or just do something completely different that you know nothing about. That to me is the most awesome part about it. So if you're looking to diversify, maybe you're looking to, like I mentioned, leave that corporate world and gain control of your own income and schedule. Maybe you're just looking to have unlimited PTO and the ability just to create your own income and wealth on your own. You can do that. You don't have to look any further than myperfectfranchise.net. So get in contact. You said on the last podcast you did it, just give him a call, right? I mean, just reach out to him if you're interested, and he'll walk you through every step of the process. He'll tell you how it is, and he'll end up talking a little Mac Brown with you as well, because he's a massive Mac Brown guy, massive Texas football guy, and I think he's got a little Carolina basketball love in there as well too. So you'll probably end up talking sports with him before you even talk franchises for the first hour. So get in contact with him. If you do end up talking to him, as we always say, make sure you tell him TarHeelIllustrated.com sent you on over. And come on, guys, put your life and career in your own hands. There's never going to be a right time to do it. I think a lot of people wait for the right time to do things. There's never a right time to do it. Now is the right time to do it. Reach out to him, and he'll be there along the process with you every single step of the way. Big thank you to Andy for continuing to sponsor and continue to partner with us. We've enjoyed it, and long may the partnership continue. Let's look ahead with Paxson Wojcik, AJ. And I was interesting because I was reading the story that you put out, and there's so much talk, because his dad talks about him, the scouting report you mentioned, and then his coach at Brown, Mike Martin, has a quote about him as well in there. And the thing that pops out the most to me is what we talked about earlier, is that leadership. They both talk about that. And even Mike Martin described him as an infectious personality, and said he has great leadership ability. His dad kind of said along the same things, kind of said, I always kind of raised my sons to be leaders. I wanted them to be kind of lead from the front guys. And that's what we've always heard about Paxson Wojcik coming in. You can even just go watch his highlights at Brown and Loyola and see that in spurts even, and that's super important, because I think in sports, we're such a stat driven society now, AJ, when it comes to sports. I feel like stats are so important. It's all about, well, how much does he average? How much does he play? You can even go even deeper, especially in football, with these PFF stats and all this kind of stuff. We're such a stat driven business that I think sometimes the intangibles that don't show up on a stat sheet, but are equally as important for teams to be successful, just kind of go under the radar. For me, Paxson Wojcik could bring that. And again, we're not talking about a guy that averaged 2 points at Brown and 0.5 assists and played 5 minutes. No, he was very, very integral to what they did last year and had big moments in big games against big programs, which I think should translate to what he's going to do at North Carolina. He's not just a guy that's going to come in and, yeah, he's a good leader, but he's going to average 1 point a game. I don't expect that to happen. He can do a little bit of both, but I think what Wojcik brings in that leadership side, in that guy who's a positive influence in that locker room, that to me is so important for this team coming up, because there are so many new faces in this program, but there's also a lot of old heads that have been there for a while as well. Just talking about RJ and Armando. So a guy like that can maybe bridge that gap for you, can be a leader as a guy who's coming in and is going to bring that leadership and that good personality to the locker room, which let's face it, AJ, how many times did we talk about locker room charisma, togetherness issues last year and the year before that? That's been a topic of conversation. So bringing in a guy like this that can not only do different things on the court for you, but also brings that intangible that doesn't show up on the stat sheet to your locker room and to your court every night, that to me is incredibly important. And that's what the focus needs to be with Paxson Wojcik. So when you look ahead, what do you think his role could potentially be on this team coming up for the new season?
Imagine Hubert going to the bench at about the 12-minute mark, 11-minute mark of the first half, and he inserts Paxson Wojcik into the game. What is he going to bring out to the floor in that moment? one of the things he automatically will carry with him onto the court is something that they haven't had for a while. And that's a load of experience, been there, done that, and a guy that can help you in myriad ways. He's going to be uber confident when he steps on the floor. Last year, the bench was primarily young guys, unproven guys that were, I think, played timid at times. DeMarco Dunn, Dontrez Styles, clearly, and they're gone now. Tyler Nickel, he's gone now. We talked about Seth Trimble on that podcast about how he was a young guy and feeling his way around, and his minutes dropped. Paxson Wojcik doesn't have to fight through a lot of the things that Carolina's reserves the last couple of years have had to work through because he's already done that. So when you put him into the game, he'll have a feel for the game before he gets into the game. Young guys don't often have a feel for the game before they get into the game because they're paranoid about their own minutes. They're paranoid about screwing up. They play looking over their shoulder. Paxton's not going to play looking over his shoulder. He's going to understand, okay, my job is this when I go in. I may have to guard this guy or that guy. So he's going to watch him. He's going to figure things out. He's going to be way ahead from what their bench play was before. And I think Puff was a little bit like that, but Puff really kind of had some ebbs and flows. And a lot of his mindset was often based on either health or performance, production.
Couldn't stay healthy.
Wojcik, as long as Wojcik's healthy, that's not going to be an issue for him. Hubert knows, okay, I insert that guy into the game. He's not going to make all these different mistakes. He's going to, if they're running a set, he's going to run the set. If they're in freelance, he's already proven he could play off guys because of where he's played in his college career already. And he's a guy that can help them do something. He's not going to be a minute consumer who has nothing but zeros in the stat sheet. He's a guy that can hit an open shot. He's left-handed, so it's a little awkward for defenders. You're used to right-handed guys, so sometimes the lefty gets a little bit of an advantage because the awkwardness of dealing with a guy who's left-hand strong first, left-hand shot, left-hand floater, that kind of stuff. So he can put the ball in the basket. He can find open teammates, and he's going to mix it up. He's going to mix it up on the defensive end, and he's going to crash the boards. And he's a guy that's, if you think about, back in the day, anybody that's ever played basketball at a high school level or lower, really the lower level, and some guy gets in the game and you got to guard him or he's going to guard you, and you think, man, I could take that guy, and then he's annoying as hell, and you can't stand him because he's in your jock. And he doesn't let you do what you want to do. And he makes things uncomfortable for you. I could see Wojcik giving them that element this year. But he's going to do it as a guy who's got skill, proven skill. He can shoot. He's got a pretty shot. He can pass. He's got a nice pass. He's got great vision. And he moves well. So he's not just going to be a muckraker or an annoyance guy. He's going to be that with skill. So I don't think he's going to average 20 points a game. I don't think he's going to start. But in bringing a guy like that off the bench, man, they haven't had that in a while. And there's a lot of value to that. Mm-hmm. Even if it's 8 to 10 minutes a game, that's 8 to 10 minutes that he could fill out there as a highly competent player who could do a lot of things at a very solid level. They haven't had that for a while. And championship teams have guys like that. They must have guys. Joey California from UConn last year. I made that example back in the spring. Championship teams have guys like that, and Carolina has one of those guys in Paxson Wojcik.
Yeah, 6'5", 200 pounds. I expect him to be that rotation guy at the 2 and the 3. Is that kind of what you're thinking going into the season?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, I think he could be a 3. Yeah, they could play small because he's a gritty guy. Mm-hmm. He looks like he might not be, but he is. Just watch his film. He's a ball player, man. He's a gym rat. He's a baller.
So basketball IQ too, high basketball IQ coming from a kind of a coaching family. He's a coach's son. He's skilled and he's gritty. Now his ceiling is here, whereas some of the other guys may have higher ceilings. But I bet he bumps his head on his ceiling a lot more than a lot of other guys. Yeah,
and that's an attribute. So that's an attribute because Hubert, I think, is really going to have a solid idea what he's going to get from him every night. He had no clue the last couple of years, even 2 years ago, when it was Brady coming off and he was kind of trying to figure out the Brady Dawson Garcia mix, and Anthony Harris was coming. He still didn't know what he was going to get, but he's going to know with Wojcik. There's a security
Yeah.
And knowing when you go to the bench, someone's going to help you do some things and they're not going to screw up in some areas. He hasn't had that luxury since he got this job. And quite frankly, Roy didn't have that luxury either.
No.
Because even with some of the older guys Roy brought in off the bench, they never played with great confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to name names, but they never played with great confidence. I think Paxson will.
Yeah. No, I think he's a fantastic addition. And he's one that, again, it goes under the radar a little bit because of the other guys, the Harrison Ingrams that have come in, the Cormac Ryans, obviously the Elliott Cadeaus, the Jalen Withers that come in. People aren't really talking about Wojcik. Again, he was that guy early on, like, we're replacing Caleb Love with a transfer from Brown who averaged 14 points a game. And it was such a simplistic overreaction and way to look at it. I do understand with where Carolina was and coming off that tough year last year, to say the least. But again, it's the intangibles for me that really make him a good addition. And like you've talked about, Carolina hasn't had a guy like that. I'm sitting here trying to think when's the last time they kind of had a guy like that. But it's been a while, especially getting somebody like that in the portal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they've had a lot of the reserves have been young guys. You go back to like Nasir Little, who has spent the entire year trying to figure things out.
Yeah, it was only there a year
and never really was super comfortable in that role. Then you go to the next year where, I mean, he brought Dayron off the bench, but Dayron was a guy you knew what you're going to get, and he did one job, two jobs basically, and he did those pretty well. Paxton's a guy that's going to affect flow a lot differently. Mm-hmm. So I like the move when he made it. I knew why he was making it. It made a lot of sense. I'm a big fan of having dudes like that on your roster because they make everybody better. There are going to be a lot of games where he's going to play 12 minutes and people are going to forget that he played.
Yeah.
And then there are going to be some games like, man, I'm so glad they got that guy on the team. Mm-hmm. So those moments pop up all the time in March.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm overselling or overbuying Paxson Wojcik.
Yeah, potentially.
But I've done this for a long time. I've covered a lot of national championship teams, and they all have a guy like him on the roster. All of them have a guy like him on the roster. All of them. So I'm not saying this is a national championship team. I'm just saying that, a great skyline isn't just the tallest buildings. It's the filler. That's what makes a great skyline too. And he's a filler. Mm-hmm. And I think he's a noteworthy filler.
Yeah, I agree. Again, we're not sitting there saying, like you just said a few minutes ago, he's not going to average 20 points a game. I mean, he's probably not even going to average 20 minutes a game. But he's a guy that when you look at what you've got ahead of him and having a guy like that who's been there, done that, played a lot of college ball, smart guy, leader, a good influence in the locker room coming off the bench and spelling minutes for guys. I mean, that's always what you want. I'd rather have someone like him coming off the bench, AJ, than a true freshman coming off the bench, maybe with the same skill set like we've talked about in this one. You like that experience, and you like that, again, probably a guy that understands what it means to play for Carolina too, as a guy who grew up and, always, day coached here and just seems like a really good addition to a team. And again, not going to be an all-star, but do you want 12 all-stars on your roster? No, because that's going to cause a lot of disharmony, a lot of pissed off people because they're not playing enough. He's a guy that's not going to complain about that, and he's going to bring different thing off the bench. So for me, he's a positive addition, and we'll see what happens this season with Paxson Wojcik. But I think that's going to do it for us, AJ. Big thank you to My Perfect Franchise for sponsoring this one again. Check them out, myperfectfranchise.net. Links in the description below. Head on over to TarTalIllustrated.com. Become a premium subscriber, just $8.33 a month. Great time to do so. A lot of stuff going on right now, AJ. Football's in the thick of it. Recruiting's 365 days a year. And basketball is sneaking up on us, as it always does once we hit kind of September. It's not too far away now. So come on and get involved there as well. Follow us on Twitter at Heel Illustrated. Follow me on Twitter as well at Jacob Turner THI, and we appreciate you guys watching. As always, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell too. See you on the next one. Thanks.